In the 1920s and 30s, British and American speedboat racers competed against each other in a series of desperate and bitter duels. The races excited the imagination of the public, and the eyes of millions watched these gladiatorial spectacles, making the impossible possible. The Goliath American power-packed, supercharged fast boats faced fierce combat from the lean and innovative British challengers.
I shall be very surprised if I have any luck, but I'll promise you I'll do the best I can to bring that trophy back here.
Many of the crews were injured. Tragically, some were to die. But Britain and America would go head-to-head in one of the great spectator sports of the century. July 2003, the Isle of Wight, England. An international field of offshore powerboat racers take to the water to compete for the 100th anniversary of the international Harmsworth Trophy. Racing in 3 heats over 3 days, the trophy is the ultimate prize in powerboat racing and the symbol of speedboat supremacy. It's nation versus nation. The British challenger this year was Lord Normanton, competing in Premier Crew.
It's the trophy that everybody wants to win. If you haven't won the Harmsworth, you haven't achieved. I want to win it. I want to get my name on that trophy.
But this year's winner was Hans Burgnick of Austria, who beat off the British challenge. These champions are the latest in a line that goes back more than 100 years.
As I went down in the river,
Michigan, America. For centuries, the gentle ripples of the great American lakes were not disturbed by anything more rigorous than the slow rhythm of canoes and rowing boats.
oh sisters, let's go down.
Then, in 1893, Christopher Columbus Smith drove the first powerboat on the St. Clair River with a petrol engine. It cruised at 9 miles per hour.
Oh sinners, let's go down, let's go down, come on.
As soon as the powerboat was invented, faster and faster boats started to be built, and someone wanted to race them. The 1900s witnessed the first great duels of speed and record breaking. The combustion engine was pushed to greater and greater limits. Motor racing sports began to draw huge crowds around the world. Then, in 1903, Alfred Harmsworth, proprietor of the Daily Mail, created the first international speedboat challenge, the Harmsworth Trophy. The rules stated that the crews and the boats must both be from the competing country. The size of hull and the power of the engines were unlimited. The winner of the first Harmsworth race was the English Napier racing launch, with a notable top speed of 19 miles per hour. After the First World War in Detroit, Garfield Wood, the American who was to dominate the next 20 years of speedboat racing, was preparing to enter the race. Garwood was a millionaire who had made his fortune by inventing the hydraulic truck hoist, but his first love was speedboats.
His sport became a passion, his passion became an obsession. Greater and greater power into more and more efficiently built boats, which he started by calling Miss Detroit because it was the Motor City, and then patriotically calling Miss America.
Garwood had a successful powerboat business, and all his engineering innovation went into speedboat racing. Wood's first racing speedboat was a hydroplane, Miss Detroit. It was a revolutionary leap forward, with the boat planing on top of the water, and it had the stability to be driven by much larger engines. The future of speedboat racing seemed to be in America, with what became known as the Roaring Twenties. The rich and famous were enjoying a hedonistic lifestyle. Water sports and speedboat racing was becoming all the rage. This was the sport of millionaires. In August 1920, Garwood arrived at Osborne Bay, Isle of Wight, with his new boat, Miss America, to challenge for the first time for the Harmsworth Trophy. Thousands of spectators lined the shores for this historic event. Garwood won the race, outclassing the British with his two 1,000 horsepower engines.
Well, he never settled for second. He always had to be the best. And the man had no fear. He just jumped in those boats, he ran those boats, and whatever happened, happened, you know.
Garwood had taken the top prize in powerboating with his vast Miss America boat. From now on, the Harmsworth would be held in Wood's hometown of Detroit until someone could challenge him and win. Every race attracted the world's press, but Wood and his Miss America 2, now fitted out with 4 huge aircraft engines, beat off all opposition. Wood thrived on competition. He would never miss any opportunity for a race and loved the publicity. Then, in 1925, he raced the fastest train in the world down the Hudson River in his Baby Gar speedboat, 1,250 miles from Albany to New York.
It was beautifully staged. There were thousands of people along the river, and there was an aeroplane following them from above that was broadcasting to a wireless station. He knew how to drum up publicity, and he knew how to have a good time.
To the astonishment of America, he beat the train by 41 minutes. In Britain, the second of the legendary figures in powerboating was now about to enter the frame. Hubert Scott Payne of the British Powerboat Company in Hythe, already a British speed legend, decided to mount a challenge against Garwood's latest, Miss America 7.
Racing the boats at high speeds against the Americans was a way of proving that the designs that he had were better than the Americans, using different engines and different design concepts. And that really proved the product when it came to the marketplace.
Like Garwood, Scott Payne was already a successful engineer and innovator. He had made his fortune in supermarine aviation and had won the world-famous Schneider Trophy air race with a design that later spawned the Spitfire.
He was terribly British, and I can always remember as a kid him saying to me, "Remember, my dear, you're British, and you marry a Britisher." Oh no, he was very, very patriotic, yes.
He was always innovative. Weight was the biggest problem, of course. Everything, being an aircraft man from supermarine, weight was no good. It had to be strong, but anything with weight unnecessary, out.
He didn't like it if you beat him. But he made it, and he knew it, and he'd tell you, lucky, you'd say he was lucky, I said. And of course, my eldest brother used to say, not luck, it's experience. We want a bit more experience than what you got. No, he didn't like that.
Scott Payne's ideas were revolutionary and were diametrically opposite to the American approach. Scott Payne proposed a small single-engine boat to compete against the brute force of Garwood's mighty aero engines. The construction took only 7 weeks in great secrecy in the Hythe boatyard.
You'd probably have about 20 or 30 people who were absolutely sworn to secrecy about what was going on. No one else was allowed to go into those sheds, and out would come a boat that, you know, it would just take people by surprise.
He was certainly concerned with other companies trying to pinch his ideas, and I mean, there was a lot of competition, and he was jealous of his design, which he knew was right and good, and he didn't want anybody else to get hold of him if he could avoid it.
Scott Payne then persuaded the most celebrated motor racing driver of the day, the first man to travel on land at 200 miles per hour, to join him as team driver, Henry Seagrave.
1923, the Grand Prix at Tours, a distance of 496 miles. Britain's Sunbeam team included Henry Seagrave and K.D. Guinness. The race was won at an average speed of 75.3 miles an hour by Henry Seagrave.
But Seagrave had no experience with fast boats, so Scott Payne personally taught Seagrave the skills needed to master the maneuverability of the boat, to control high speed on straight runs, and handling around tight corners without dangerously turning over.
Scotty felt that he knew a lot about boats. Seagrave had hardly handled the helm of a boat, and so he could be alongside him and teach him the ropes and build the boat at the same time.
In 1929, Seagrave broke the land speed record with a run of 231 miles per hour at Daytona Beach, Florida. Fresh from this success, he went on to compete in Miss England at the World Motorboat Championship in Miami. Could Seagrave bring his prowess from the racetrack to the world of powerboats? How would the fastest man on land fare when he came up against Garwood, the fastest man on water? At the 1929 Miami Regatta, Garwood, the American water speed champion, looking for challengers, was desperate to give Henry Seagrave, the British land speed record holder, a good race. His aim was to seduce the English speed king to the thrills of speedboat racing. Without other challengers, Garwood wanted to encourage Seagrave to mount a British challenge for the Harmsworth later that year. Seagrave was given the pole position, but soon was dangerously fighting Wood's wash. The dramatic confrontation between Miss England and Miss America 7 took place across a 12-mile course. After a tense second heat, Seagrave finally drew ahead of the American and to victory. For the first time in 9 years, a British boat had beaten Garwood.
It was a real scoop for the yard. It boosted everyone's morale, and it was a great attribute to Scott Payne, and it paved the way for future successes.
Waiting for news back in Britain, a jubilant Scott Payne received a cable from Seagrave in America.
We won. Boat ran dead ahead horizontal, handles beautifully, no wash. Hull simply wonderful, motor wonderful. Congratulations, Seagrave.
The victory over America turned into a national celebration. Seagrave was now speed king on land and water. He returned home to a knighthood and a hero's welcome. Now a major celebrity, Seagrave was poached from Scott Payne to join a new British powerboat team. Their goal, to win back the Harmsworth Trophy. But first, he had one more ambition to fulfill, and he took his new boat, Miss England 2, to Lake Windermere in an attempt to break the world water speed record.
To my friend, Sir Henry Seagrave, I convey my sincere wishes. I hope that good luck will continue with him when he is at the helm of this boat.
It couldn't go wrong. It was a beautiful white boat. It had a fine team, Union Jacks. Everything was gung-ho for a most wonderful speed record. They go down the lake. The boat is going well. No propellers braking. It's going up to 95 miles an hour. This is it. This is the feeling that we're going to get a record. We're going to beat that American. We really are going to be successful.
Seagrave made 2 timed runs. His average speed was 98 miles per hour. But he didn't realize he had broken Garwood's record by 5 miles per hour. So, to the surprise of the crowds, he turned and accelerated for a third, all-out run.
But bear in mind, it was the Friday the 13th of June, 1930. This was a man that didn't carry mascots. But this is a man who went out, broke the record, and then said, let's turn her around and put full throttle and see what she will do.
The roar was terrific. Racing now at over 100 miles per hour, Miss England made a sudden turn, then slowly cartwheeled out of the water with her engines screaming. It was the worst that could happen. The boat had hit a submerged log.
He comes to consciousness and he says, did I break the record? Yeah, said his wife, trying to sort of hold back the tears. He said, well, How much by? 5 miles an hour. And Seagrave, who'd survived so many things, said, now I can die.
Sir Henry Seagrave, along with mechanic Ted Garner, died. Chief mechanic Michael Wilcox miraculously survived. For Garwood, this was also a blow. Now he had lost his challenger.
By 1926, Garwood was getting to the point where what did he have a trophy for if he didn't have any challengers?
Now a new eccentric driver appeared briefly on the scene, ready and willing to take on Garwood's challenge.
Betty Carstairs, having driven ambulances on the Western Front and things like that, very brave, determined, strong woman with tattoos on her arms, decided that she would like to get into powerboat racing.
Garwood, desperate to guarantee a good harmsworth challenger, helped the millionaires to build a new boat, Estelle 5, almost a mirror image of his Miss America 8.
Garwood had a competitor, and that was what saw the escalation of interest in that race, which led to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people turning up to see this extraordinary combat.
This is the first time that there's a full British team going over to America to contest against the invincible Mr. Garwood. This is Estelle 4. We have 2 unsupercharged Napiers, and inside is Estelle 5 with 2 supercharged Napiers. And I think we have a pretty good chance. Can't say. I don't like to say very much because I don't think it's very good luck to boost oneself.
Although the boats were evenly matched, for Betty Carstairs it was a disaster. Her engine blew up. She would never challenge again. Garwood went on to win the 1930 Harmsworth Trophy in Miss America 8, with his brother George a close second in Miss America 7. It was now time for Scott Payne to reveal his revolutionary design, developed in the secret workshop at Hythe. Miss Britain 1 had been built as a test bed of ideas for a future Harmsworth challenge. Keen to push the engineering to its limits, Scott Payne decided to compete for the Detroit International News Trophy. But first, it was time to talk to the press.
Although it isn't as fast as I would like it to be, nothing ever is, of course, it has proved to be very successful. The great idea is to do away with the heavy sides of the boat and take the strains of the structure through a central girder, which you see here, and it is built up of wood longerons and struts in exactly the same manner as an aeroplane fuselage.
He could build the boat in the yard, design it in the yard, test it on the water outside the yard, and then that was, of course, a big bonus, a big plus sign. And then again, of course, the competition. The thought of a competition and a race, I think, to Scotty was just, like gunpowder. He had to go and had to win.
He used to say that he used to think about going for the Harmsworth Trophy every time he shaved in the morning. It was a long-term ambition. He was going to get it back for Britain. And that's why he called his boats Miss Britain.
Notice the way Miss Britain turns without decelerating at all. As I've already told you, I know I've got a tough job on, and I shall be very surprised if I have any luck. But I'll promise you I'll do the best I can to bring that trophy back here.
Miss Britain 1 was shipped to America to compete in the single-engine Detroit News Trophy. Here, the unusual design proved a winner and impressed the Americans enormously with both her speed and maneuverability. The rivalry between the two nations and the competing teams was becoming intense. In 1930, back in Britain, Miss England 2 was miraculously salvaged from Lake Windermere. 2 new Rolls-Royce engines were fitted to compete for the world water speed record and a future British Harmsworth challenge. Now another legendary figure in motor racing was about to enter the race. Miss England's new driver was Kay Don, the latest world land speed record holder. Whilst Don was still preparing to mount his challenge, Garwood showed up the British once again. In Detroit, he became the first man in the world to break the 100 miles per hour barrier in a speedboat over a measured mile. Garwood humbly maintained that his success was due to two captains of fate.
These teddy bears have been our mascots for years. Teddy, the one I hold, is my lucky bear, and Bruin, the one Orland Johnson holds, is his lucky bear, and the combination is hard to beat.
Buenos Aires, April 1931.
Our reason for being here is to attack the world water speed record recently wrestled from Great Britain by America.
Wood's record only stood for 3 days. In Buenos Aires, K. Don snatched it back from America by a marginal 1¼ miles per hour, in a record-breaking 103.5 miles per hour. K. Don was feted on his return to London and welcomed by Lord Wakefield, whose patriotic sponsorship had finally paid off.
Mr. K. Don, I am very glad indeed to welcome you home and to offer you my warmest congratulations upon your success with my Miss England #2. I'm very grateful to you, Lord Wakefield, for the very warm welcome you've extended to me on my return home, and I feel proud to think I've had the opportunity of regaining for Great Britain the world speed water record.
Fresh from this success, it was now time for K. Don and Miss England 2 to take on Garwood to win back the world's most prestigious trophy, the Harmsworth. In 1931, nearly 1 million people lined the Detroit River to witness what would turn out to be the most controversial speedboat race of all time between Britain and America. September 1931, Detroit, Motor City, USA. These were the days of economic depression, prohibition, gangsters, and bootleg booze. But everybody in America knew this was also the venue for the greatest head-to-head speedboat race ever, the 17th Harmsworth Trophy. K. Don and the Miss England 2 team traveled from Britain to challenge Garwood's 2 boats, Miss America 8 and 9.
It gives me great pleasure to come to this very wonderful city. I've been looking forward for many months to the race that I'm going to have with that great sportsman, Commodore Garwood, the man, I should say, who has done more for the motorboat industry than any other man in the world. I think we shall see a very excellent contest. Great pleasure to introduce...
But before the great duel on water, for the world's press, some verbal shadowboxing.
I'll be glad to take you around and show you this course that we have and show you where the high spots are and the low spots and so forth. So when you get out there running around 110 miles an hour, you won't have to hunt around for these things. Just let her go.
Well, that's awfully nice of Mr. Wood, and I do appreciate it very, very much indeed.
Starting from the Detroit Yacht Club and the Detroit River, the Harmsworth Trophy race of 1931 has prompted more lively debate than any sporting event since the famous long count in Chicago. Here is one of the principal figures in the argument, K. Don.
And the people still talk about the race. I've had a lot of the old-timers come in the shop, and, you know, everybody talks about the race, you know, who won, or was it dirty play, or whatever happened.
The rivalry was there. And of course you had a kind of a one-sided crowd here because everybody was rooting for Garwood.
To me, the start was terrific. To watch all these boats circling around, trying to time it right, and here Garwood is coming from way back there, you know, and bang, they hit the starting line.
K. Don got away to a beautiful start in the first heat. Miss England is in the center, with Gar on the right and the second Wood boat on the inside of the course.
To complete the race, the boats had to travel 6 times around a 5-mile course. There were to be 3 heats over 3 days. The key to winning was split-second timing across the start line. More than 5 seconds early and you were disqualified. Time it right, you win pole position and the contender is left to fight your wash.
You feel like a gladiator. You feel you're in the middle of the ring. And as the gladiator says, is this what you want? Is this what you've come for? Have you come to see us win, or have you come to see us die? Perhaps some of you have come to see us die.
Almost 1 million spectators lined the riverbanks and jetties, packed tight at every vantage point, in countless boats, cruisers and yachts. This was the largest crowd in the history of any sporting event.
Of course, I was kind of privileged a little bit because knowing Garwood, we got some spots right under the judge's stand and right on the water's edge at the end of Main Dock where we could really observe everything both up and downstream. And when he got across from the on the starting line, the sound was deafening. As they say, to waken the dead, ear-piercing.
At the end of the first lap, when the boats passed the starting line at the Yacht Club, Miss England was traveling better than 90 miles an hour and was gaining on Miss America Knight.
It was a joust. It was almost a joust to the death because they were doing speeds that no boats in the history of marine engineering had ever done, and going around a 35-lap course to do it. This was nothing short of suicidal, but suicidal in a very public way.
Miss England second, silver gray, and with Kay Don and his mechanics sitting in front of the engines. And here's Miss America ninth, mahogany red in color, with Garwood and his mechanician sitting aft of the motors. They pass the Yacht Club again with Kay Don safely ahead. Well, here's the winner.
When Kay Don, the Brit, won the first heat, and there was great sorrow, almost, you might say, at the club here, because it just couldn't happen. I mean, it was unbelievable because he never lost to any competitor.
All manner of craft on the river and thousands of cars lining the course tooted and honked and bellowed a salute to the winner of the first heat, Kay Don, as Garwood added his congratulations. The faster boat won, Wood said after the race. Then you and I and a million more of us tried to get home. Imagine the bumpers that were hooked and the fenders that were dented and the bad words that were said here. Just one of scores of parking places where the spectators had left the family car.
But Gar had a problem after the first heat, after losing. He had a leaking gas tank. Well, they wanted to give Gar a little more time. Kay Don said, well, I don't think so.
He wanted to hold Garwood's nose to the rules, and because, well, he was bound in Germany, he was going to beat him.
With a high-octane fuel tank leaking, Miss America 9 was a time bomb. Garwood's reaction was incredible. To fire up a brazing torch and attempt to fix it there and then.
Well, Garwood, he sits right on top of the gas tank on the deck while he's brazing it, you know. Oh, well, if it's going to blow, it's going to blow.
Any man that has what he had at the time and would have enough guts to get in a boat with a full tank of gasoline and a brazing iron in order to stop a leak has to have an awful lot of adrenaline pumping because he had a lot to lose.
Well, Gar knew he was still in trouble to make this race. And Kay Don says, well, I beat him before, I can beat him again. So at the beginning line, before the race started, Gar went up to him and, you know, I hope good luck in that, but I'm going to beat you off the line. So right away he's prepping him. So he's thinking, he's going to beat me off the line. He must think I'm faster off the line. So Kay Don, he's, you know, on the line. Then when he sees the other one take off fast, I must have missed the gun. Zoom, off he went after him.
The minute the gun went off, then they really opened the throttles full bore on their boats, and the one that was ahead was, chances were, much in his favor of winning that particular heat.
It was over the dash to the start line that the real controversy later raged. Did Garwood deliberately force Kay Don over the starting line early and face disqualification? If so, this was a highly dangerous tactic.
You know, the trap was set, and he went right into it.
Garwood in Miss America 9th is first, followed by Miss England and Miss America 8th. Now, listen for that starting gun. That was it.
They go over the line, and this time, Don is riding in Gar's wash.
Off they go, boom, boom, boom. So Gary's ahead of him, you know, around the first lap. So here comes Kay Don. He's going to catch him and go up. So Kay Don's too excited. he goes over Gar's wake. Big mistake.
Now they are rounding the fatal turn near the Belle Isle Bridge. Garwood makes a sweeping curve around the orange and blue buoy. Now watch Kay Don. His boat seems to waver and bucks in Garwood's wash. It appears to be out of control. Meanwhile, Miss America is off on the long 2-mile straightaway. And then...
the vortex, as he turns, flips the boat over. And these guys are just flicked into the water like so many corks out of a bottle. And George Wood, who's following, had the presence of mind maybe to keep a little bit to port or to starboard, otherwise he might have run them over and cut their heads off. And he continues and he completes the lap.
But nobody is interested in the race now. The question is, where are Kay Don and his associates? That boat carried the gallant Major Seagrave to his death. Has Kay Don escaped the same fate? One by one, 3 heads appear above the waves. Lines are thrown to them, and they are pulled aboard government and official patrol boats. Second thought is for Miss England's second. A line is made fast to the disappearing prow, but her weight is too great, and the line snaps. Miss England's hope to lift the Harmsworth trophy brought to the United States by Garwood 11 years ago lies now in the mud 20 feet below the surface of the Detroit River. But the arguments will not down. Well, you've seen the 2 heats. Who should have won, Kay Don or Garwood?
Ironically, both men had beaten the starting gun, Wood by 9 seconds and Don by 7 seconds. They were both disqualified, allowing Gar's brother to win.
The following day, the Fleet Street newspapers in London and the American newspapers had a field day accusing Garwood of being a trickster, an old grey fox that had tricked this noble Englishman across the line. It has to be the most controversial race fiasco in the entire history of powerboating.
The Detroit Times reported from a source close to Wood, the entire plot to trick Don of victory was planned in the American boathouse by the Garwood team an hour before the race. But on the day, as ever in defeat, Kay Don was the perfect Englishman.
On Monday, it was rather unfortunate. Both Garwood and myself crossed the line before the starting gun, and we were both disqualified. Then I had that unfortunate accident due to a very violent skid on the first turn, which I corrected, but when she came straight again, she caught a watch and turned over. However, that's just the luck of the game, and I suppose it can't be helped.
Wood's Miss America 8, with his brother George driving, had, as planned, finished the race alone. And incredibly, the Harmsworth trophy stayed in America. The uproar over this race increased the rivalry between the two nations. It was now time for an old adversary to re-enter the race. Hubert Scott Payne was about to return and to fight the final duel with the most revolutionary speedboat of the decade. The Harmsworth Trophy was no longer just a challenge between two teams to be the fastest. It had become a bitter duel between Britain and America, and between two very different approaches to the building of high-speed powerboats. Hubert Scott Payne of the British Powerboat Company was putting together a new design team. He was secretly building a new generation of experimental boats to mount a final challenge against Garwood and the Americans.
Miss Britain 3 was built in a special shop, but in a small shop where there was only 5 men. And when she came out, we were surprised to find that she wasn't wood.
Scott Payne and designer Tommy Quelch had created a streamlined aluminium-clad masterpiece. It offered the world of powerboats a glimpse into the future.
I told him what I thought about it. I thought it was a lot of rubbish. But he said, it's a speedboat. Well, it might be a speedboat, but it's not a boat to me. It's a tin can. Well, he said, I'm disappointed over that, he said, but it is a speedboat, and I've built it to beat Garwood.
Miss Britain 3 was extremely advanced, even by today's standards. If you look at the boat, it is just, you know, such an impressive piece of design. I think in materials technology he certainly scores very highly. Metal sandwich construction for a racing boat was extremely advanced for the day. It was extremely strong but very light.
Then I always wanted to go with Mr. Scott Payne on one of his speed trials. But he didn't tell me about me back and have a cushion or anything. And when I went with him, of course, it hurt me back. But it was a nice experience for me to be doing 103 miles an hour.
Garwood's latest design feat, the mighty Miss America 9, was powered with 2 giant blazing Packard aircraft engines. But to everyone's surprise, Wood failed in 1931 to beat Kay Don's British world water speed record. Typical of Garwood, his answer was to build a bigger boat with even more engine power. Miss America 10 was to be called a madman's dream. Wood conceived of the most ambitious experiment of packed power yet undertaken. Miss America 10 was 38 feet long with an all-wood hull construction packed with 4 supercharged Packard engines, the most powerful engines in America. Driving this was like sitting on 9 tons of dynamite.
It was literally headlines in the paper, Garwood was going to kill himself in this boat because it developed a substantial amount of horsepower. I think it was well in excess at the time it was built of 6,000 horsepower. It'll actually suck your shirt right out of your pants.
When Miss America 10 was unveiled, she was the largest and most powerful speedboat ever built to defend the Harmsworth Trophy. Now, the international race was on. Whilst Scott Payne was still testing his futuristic aluminium-plated Miss Britain 3, another British boat-building competitor was working round the clock building a sleek Miss England 3.
Lord Wakefield, I have much pleasure in now handing over your new boat, Miss England 3. And wishing you on behalf of my firm and myself every success in your attempt on the speed record and later in the great international race in Detroit.
Now I join you, sir, in congratulating Sir John Thornycroft and all those who played a part in the construction of Miss England III.
Would this challenge be Lord Wakefield's and Kay Don's final British attempt to win back the prestigious Harmsworth Trophy from America and Garwood?
Off to a running start in the deciding heat for the Harmsworth Trophy. These pictures taken from a plane show Kay Don and Garwood battling for the lead. There goes Miss England 3rd ahead. Miss America 10th is right behind her, with the throttle wide open. Look, Kay Don slowing up. His engines are missing, and he has to withdraw from the race. It's too bad. Garwood finishes alone at more than a mile a minute.
This was the end for even Lord Wakefield, who was running out of funds and decided to withdraw his sponsorship. Britain's only remaining hope of taking on the might of America in the Harmsworth Challenge lay with Hubert Scott Payne and the futuristic Miss Britain 3.
This was a real David and Goliath situation where Scott Payne was a one-man band from the UK competing against someone who had more power, more money, and Scott Payne really built a craft that was more highly advanced. It was a better design, it was more innovative, better materials technology, slightly let down by the engine size and availability, but at the end of the day he had a boat that was just under half the size and a quarter of the power.
Surprisingly, the gigantic Miss America 10 and the tiny Miss Britain 3 were amazingly well matched. But few in America believed Scott Payne had any chance whatsoever.
And he arrived in Detroit for the race, which came to be known as the David versus Goliath.
The Garwood's boat had 4 engines, and she was longer. Now, Mr. Scott Payne knew that. He knew it. So we built this boat with the idea that he would be able to do it with 1 engine and be quicker on the turns.
Garwood on the left, the Silver Fox of speedboat racing, expects to retain the Harmsworth Trophy in his giant Miss America 10. Scott Payne, the British challenger, hopes to win the coveted cup with his newly designed Miss Britain 3, which is the smallest craft ever entered for the race. There are 3 heats, each run over about 40 miles on an oval 8-mile course.
Scott Payne had designed Miss Britain 3 for Lake Sinclair, a nice wide course where he could dodge the wash of this big juggernaut. But then what had happened? They'd changed the rules. They'd moved the goalposts. They said, we're going to race on the Detroit River, a tight course in which Scott Payne was going to have to take the wash of that juggernaut.
Hundreds of thousands of spectators had turned up, but the world's press had gathered to report on what was seen to be a foregone conclusion, an easy US win over the underpowered Brits. The British team were keen to show their mettle. The crowds were to see a unique demonstration of courage and expert boat handling by Scott Payne and his mechanic, Gordon Thomas. For once in his life, Garwood had a duel with an Englishman who knew the tactics of the race, the strengths and weaknesses of his boat, and above all, who could maneuver the tight turns at high speed.
The race is on between Garwood, the old grey fox of speedboat racing, in Miss America 10, and his new challenger from Britain, Hubert Scott Payne. Miss America 10 takes an early lead with her powerful engine. This was the craft in which the American, who has held the Harmsworth trophy since 1920, beat Payne last year. Scott Payne, whose boat is only rated at 1,300 horsepower, makes a plucky fight of it.
Scotty knew how to race powerboats. He'd raced them for at least 10 years, so had Gar. They were very experienced. They were well matched in that respect.
The boat could go into tighter corners, it manoeuvred better, it was probably as good on acceleration, didn't quite have the top end speed-wise, but if he'd had a bigger engine, which he could have had, he probably would have won the day.
Miss America 10 won the final heat by just 22 seconds. Scott Payne had given Wood the biggest scare of his life, the single-engined Brit versus the 4-engined American powerhouse. But the British challenge of Scott Payne had won the hearts of the world. When Garwood took Miss America 10 for a lap of honor, he broke the propeller shaft and came to an abrupt stop. This was to mark the end of an extraordinary era and would be the Speedboat King's final race. The surprising strength of the British challenge had stunned the international speedboating world. The smart, streamlined engineering of Miss Britain 3 had shown the way of the future.
The 10th was obsolete. It was a new era. Gar knew that, and it played itself out. After that, Gar retired from racing. And those guys were setting records. The speeds haven't got much more than that after all these years.
Scott Payne is trying for a new record today with his small speedboat Miss Britain 3, which gave Garwood such a race on the second day at Detroit.
But Scott Payne was to continue to defy danger. His next dice with death was in Poole Harbour, racing for the world single-engine water speed record.
Over the waters of Poole Harbour, Miss Britain skims at the great average speed of 95.08 miles per hour, smashing Seagrave's unofficial single-engine motor's record of 92.78.
As he was going along absolutely flat out, this boat came along and he had to swerve to avoid hitting it. And of course that tipped the boat, which slopped, I presume, the petrol. This is what I think he said afterwards. And of course then the whole thing burst into flames and it was just instantaneous. That was very frightening, because the whole thing, and of course I can remember crying like anything, saying to Mummy, "Oh, is Daddy all right, Daddy all right?"
But to everybody's relief, neither Scott Payne nor his mechanic are seriously injured. Many hands are ready with extinguishers, and the fire is got under before it can reach the petrol tanks.
He got all singed, his back of his hair and all his eyebrows and things all got singed off.
The boat is towed in with her metal hull intact, and Scott Payne in the bows ready to race again another day.
I've got to thank everybody very much indeed for coming along and giving me all the help they have done. And, matter of fact, it's all in a day's work. This comes along, we'll get over it all right.
The damage was quickly repaired, and Miss Britain returned to the cold and still Southampton water on the 16th of November, 1933. She roared against the historical tide. Hubert Scott Payne and Gordon Thomas reached a world water speed record for a single-engine boat of 100.132 miles per hour.
Here is the record breaker, hurtling past the camera at close-up range.
A record that was to remain unbroken for over 50 years.
For the first time in the history of the world, put up 100 miles an hour on salt water. And I must say that I'm very glad that we've been able to achieve our object.
Scott Payne's sleek new speedboats had never been able to beat Garwood's vast heavyweights. But Scott Payne's design innovations would enjoy a more lasting victory on a very different battlefield. The British Powerboat Company now concentrated on persuading the British Admiralty to accept a new concept in fast warships, a revolutionary plan to build a fleet of fast motor torpedo boats. By the eve of the Second World War, Scott Payne had won this battle and built for the Royal Navy a set of elegant, fast motorboats. The innovative motor torpedo boat was twice as fast as any other naval craft on water.
You could put a person up there and say, well, how fast do you think we're going? You know, you could look at and say, well, we're doing 20 knots or something like that. In fact, you'd be doing nearer 40 knots. You just had no idea of speed, like an aeroplane. No idea of speed at all up in the wheelhouse.
But the final victory was still to come, in America. In October 1939, Hubert Scott Payne of the British Powerboat Company was invited to a secret meeting with President Roosevelt at the White House. After this meeting, the US Navy decided to commission a fleet of fast motor patrol torpedo boats. These fast boats would go on to create their own legends and make an enormous contribution to the American success in winning the war in the Pacific. Scott Payne would win worldwide fame as the Englishman who brought the famous PT boats to America. The bitter duels, the desire to win, the love of speed in the 1920s and 30s of the British and American speedboat racers had created a unique moment in the story of human endeavor.
I think what's missing in powerboating today is the spirit of trying an untried technology which people say, it's impossible, you're mad. The most interesting part of powerboating are people who innovated, who laid their neck on the line to do the impossible that had not been done, not to repeat what others had done.
I sit behind that wheel without the motors running and I look ahead and I just think you'd have to be a little crazy to get back there and pull those throttles with all that. I just look at that, it's scary. It's just darn scary.
Next Monday at 8 on Speed Machines, aircraft that were designed to fly beyond the speed of sound. You can explore the design and technology that won the race tonight at our website, channel4.com/science. Next up, 7 Days That Shook EastEnders.